Hello, and welcome back to my channel, Talented Reads. Today, I'm going to be talking about my April wrap-up for the Horror Challenge. From my graphic that I have here, we're continuing in the paranormal section. April was all about devil, demon, and hell. I've completed the 3 prior subgenres in this section. I have a playlist for all of the Horror Challenge wrap-ups. I will link that in the description box if you want to check any of the other ones out. A reminder, the Horror Challenge is a mixture of books and movies that I am taking new reads and watches and then making some of my own recommendations. I read a total of 5 new books, so let's get into it. First is Needful Things by Stephen King. Mr. Leland Gaunt, a new stranger to the town of Castle Rock, Maine, has opened a new shop called Needful Things. And in his shop, there's something for everyone, but there's always a price. And as Mr. Gaunt always says, prices are negotiable. And it's not about how much he's selling it for, but how much you're willing to pay for it. Because to him, it's worth your very soul. So I will say this is my favorite book from the 5 that I read. And, when talking horror, you just can't go wrong with Stephen King. Now, saying that, I will say that after reading things like It and Cujo, Needful Things is a bit on the lighter side. But of course still weaves, a tale of horror. I really thought that the Needful Things store was such an interesting take to the trope of selling your soul to the devil. And, it is just kind of funny because almost all of the characters, in the beginning say they won't be taken in by the charm, and then of course are fully taken in by the charm. This book was pretty thick, and this was basically weaving a tale of chaos in the town of Castle Rock. So, as you can imagine, with a lot of residents, it takes a while to get to that full-on breakdown. So, sometimes it felt repetitive, but I will say that each town resident was different. How they got their item was different. What they had to do to keep their item was different. And of course, the item that they got was different for everybody. So, although there was some repetition, there was still not a lot of overlap for each individual resident, which is kind of crazy when you think about, how many people you would have to think about for a town. So that was pretty cool. And, it was such a good build-up. Once things are kind of set into motion, it really doesn't take long at all for everything to just descend into pure chaos. Next is A Lush and Seething Hell by John Horner Jacobs. These are 2 novellas. The Sea Dreams, It Is the Sky is the first novella. And My Heart Struck Sorrow is the second novella. The Sea Dreams, It Is the Sky is about a one-eyed mysterious poet in exile who has left his girlfriend a journal which recounts his efforts of translating a text. My Heart Struck Sorrow is about a librarian who comes out on a journey to record a song from the Deep South, which is said to conjure the devil himself. So I originally really picked this up just for the second story, which is definitely more of a devil story than the first one was. And in fact, I cared for the second story much more than the first one. It was very much a Southern Gothic horror, and I loved the mix of music with the devil. It kind of reminded me a lot of that, Crossroads lore, which is really cool. I don't think I get a lot of mix of music in devil and horror, so I really enjoyed this. And of course, the outcome of this music is way dark. Which is also nice for a horror lover, Seed by Anya Alborn. This is about Jack, his wife Amy, and their 2 small children who have survived a horrific car crash. But while it seems miraculous that they've all survived, there's evil afoot, and it's hungry for something it feels it was owed. This was just okay. After reading 2 books by Anya Alborn and loving them, I had expected this one to just be a slam dunk, and it just wasn't. I didn't really care for any of the characters or the family. And I just didn't feel that angst or fear that the characters felt, which of course made it seem, like fake, or like the characters were over exaggerating, which took me out of the story quite a bit. The Devil in Silver by Victor Lavelle. This is about Pepper, who is a troublemaker and is dropped by the police to New Hyde Hospital's psychiatric ward. There, he meets the devil. This was a completely unexpected book. There's a lot of commentary weaved in this book about mental health and mental institutions and the residents that are kept there. It's pretty obvious to see what the author's thoughts are on all of those things. And of course, I thought the mental institution atmosphere was really a good setting for a devil storyline. I mean, how can you convince the staff that the devil is here in a place where people are quote unquote crazy, What I also thought was interesting was the fact that you couldn't really distinguish while reading it between the devil and just another patient. There were descriptions of this, so-called devil, but then, they would turn around and talk about a man character. So that was kind of both genius and really annoying. But yeah, that was in itself pretty cool because it almost made you feel like, you're not quite aware of what's going on. Very much like a lot of the patients at this institution. What really got me, though, is the romance. It's always the romance that ruins it. It just didn't seem right. I don't know, it kind of felt like it came out of nowhere, and the 2 characters that ended up forming this romance just didn't seem like 2 people who maybe outside of a mental institution would ever be together. Although with that being said, I completely understand the importance of that love interest now that I've gotten to the end of the book. But still, I think there's probably another way that you could have achieved that without having that romance element in it. And lastly, the Hellbound Heart by Clive Barker. Frank has a severe appetite for the mix of pleasure and pain. And it's so severe, in fact, that he's found his way to hell to experience it. His brother's wife, Julia, secretly in love with Frank, has found a way to bring his brother back. But as all things are when dealing with the devil, there's a price to pay. Now, if that at all sounds familiar, that's because it was the basis for the movie The Hellraiser. If you've seen The Hellraiser and thought it was pretty grotesque, the book is exactly the same. For such a small book, it's quite dense. And to be perfectly honest, I was a little glad when it was over. This is one of those books that tries to be really over the top. And while the premise was pretty interesting, the getting there was a little rough for me. But I'm happy to have read it because I think this movie has a pretty strong cult following. And of course, there's been quite a few movies. And it always amazes me that someone can think about something this sadistic and dark. Just blows my mind. Okay, so that's it for the books that I read. Let's talk about the movies that I watched. Drag Me to Hell is about a bank worker who ends up evicting a woman. And in doing so, because she's brought shame to that woman, she ends up getting cursed. What follows is the devil pushing her to her breaking point, and so desperate for some relief, she turns to a seer. Even though this movie came out 13 years ago, I would still consider this a quote-unquote newer movie, but watching it almost felt like I was watching an 80s movie. You know, some of the scenes were like over the top. The graphics seemed a little cheesy, and a lot of the acting was very so-so. But I have to admit, one scene did make me gag, so, you know, I have to get credit for that, because that doesn't happen very often. Deliver Us from Evil is about Ralph Sarchi, a New York police officer who investigates a case at the zoo, which spins into an investigation with far darker outcomes. That's all I'm going to say about this, because I think the big part of the movie needs to be something that you experience while you watch it. I've had this on my to-watch list for several years now. In fact, I remember watching the trailer when this first came out, and I remember thinking, oh, that looks like a Donna movie right there. And I'm so happy I got to it. I enjoyed this actually more than I thought I would. Though it got recommended to me for this Devil, Demon, and Hell category, I think that if you're into possession movies, this would also be a good pick. The devil and demon themes are pretty heavy throughout the whole movie, and I think are actually a lot heavier than a lot of the possession movies that I've seen. And I think that's because, you know, with a possession movie, the focus is the possession itself and not like the devil background, which I think is what you get in this movie. So that's really cool. And I liked the police point of view, as opposed to, I think a lot of movies, you know, especially with possession and stuff, are family oriented. So, you know, I think the police point, you get that, you know, solid, disbeliever. And I think that makes the movie a lot more interesting. And the graphics, whew, so spot on. Devil's Due is about a newlywed couple who are dealing with a pregnancy earlier than expected and darker than they wanted. This is in found footage style, which I thought worked well for the story and actually made the movie a lot more interesting. And the powers of the mom were some crazy shit. After watching a lot of devil movies, there are certain things you just expect, like anger, like anger that they haven't had before, extreme pain, they're like the Hulk strength, eating raw meat, the usual. But this movie certainly added some new ones to the list, so yeah, it was pretty good. And lastly is Hellraiser. I read the book, so it just felt right to watch the movie as well. This pretty much follows the synopsis of the book, though I think the character relations are a little different. For like one of the characters, I think in the book it's like their friend, but in the movie it's like their daughter or something like that. Anyways, I can honestly say that I know, in fact, I would have bet money that I've watched Hellraiser, but it must have been a long time ago because absolutely none of this movie looked at all familiar to me, which was kind of crazy. And it also had a lot less scenes of the famous Pinhead dude than I was expecting. He's only in like 2 scenes, which are pretty quick. So that was kind of shocking. And I, being the dark soul of a person that I am, I wanted to see more of this sadistic hell world than this world that we're currently in, and with the people like trying to bring this guy back. I don't know. So all in all, it was okay. I think there's a lot more. There's like 2 or 3 other movies after this. I'm not gonna watch the rest of them, but I'm glad to have read this because, like I said, I think it is a cult classic. So now for my recommendations, let's run through the book recommendations. Devil's Day by Andrew Michael Hurley. Every autumn, John returns to the Lancashire farm where he grew up to help gather the sheep from the moors. This year, he returns with his new wife, Catherine. John's grandfather has passed away, and John keeps the tradition set by his grandfather. The remembrance of folk tales, family stories, and rituals to keep the devil at bay. But this year is different. This year, the devil arrives. So I will say that I gave this 3 stars, but I'm choosing to recommend it still because I think for those looking for more of a slower psychological horror with not a lot of imagery and scares, but still looking for that kind of devil trope, this will probably be perfect for you. What I liked about this is that the devil is not really a forefront character, but seems to come alive through the people, which, is brought on by that psychological element. And there's a lot of talk about tradition and belonging and, you questioning whether you can ever really leave the place that you grew up, which is such a nice mix with kind of the whole storyline. It almost kind of felt like a cult book without being a cult book. So, very good. Horns by Joe Hill. So I'm going to read the synopsis because I think it captures it so well and way better than I could come up with something myself. Ignitus Parrish spent the night drunk and doing terrible things. He woke up the next morning with thunderous hangover, a raging headache, and a pair of horns growing from his temples. And that really is the story. This is my first experience with Joe Hill, and I remember this book to this very day. There is some commentary about religion, and, I think it gets a little playful being in the head of this boy basically becoming the devil. We're in the mind of this one character, which is so dark, yet feels so familiar and like you can relate to what he's going through. And I think this did become a movie with Daniel Radcliffe playing Ignitus, which I have actually not seen, but I did really enjoy this book. Next is Johannes Cabal, The Necromancer by Jonathan L. Howard. One of my favorites. When I first read this, I don't think I thought very highly of it, but I have reread this, and it really was a good time. So this is about Johannes Cabal. Years ago, he sold his soul to the devil to learn and become the best necromancer. But he's now decided that he wants his soul back. So Satan decides to propose a wager. Johannes has 1 year to collect 100 souls, or his own soul will be damned forever. Agreeing to the wager, Johannes becomes the owner of the traveling circus. Okay, so this book is obviously more on the lighter side of horror. There's some good humor in there, playing around with the different tropes. And Johannes hires a crew of the dead, obviously with him being a necromancer. And there's some vampires in there. So it has a good mix of that kind of like classic monstery with, this devil trope. And I loved the setting of the circus. It really added to the fun side of the story. And I thought was such a great background and setting to a way to collect those souls. And Johannes is a great character. He's kind of a snob, but also determined to beat the devil at his own game. This is a series, Johannes Cabal, the Necromancer, being the first book. And I think there are 5 or maybe 6 of them, but there's a lot of like little novellas kind of sprinkled, mixed in with, I think, some of the characters that are introduced throughout the story, like their, storyline. I have only read the first one, but would love to finish the series. Eventually. Hal House by Richard Matheson is about 4 strangers who decide to stay at the Belasco house, which is said to be haunted by the devil himself. I rated this a 3, but I'm including it on the list because my rating is actually lower than the average. There are a lot of people who enjoy this book. So the 4 strangers who agreed to stay in the house, I thought were a good mix of characters. They all had different backgrounds, different beliefs on the paranormal, and different reasons for agreeing to stay in the house. I think the book started strong, but went downhill about the halfway point. The nightly happenings seemed repetitive, including how the characters chose to deal with it. It's like, they clearly have never heard the saying, like, doing the same thing, and you can't respect different, what's that saying? Can't do the same thing and expect different results. There we go. Clearly I haven't heard the saying either. And the ending was just not as strong as I would have liked. I was hoping for the ending to be like knock my socks off to kind of like help compensate for the middle of the book, but like I said, I'm still recommending it because this is a favorite for a lot of people. So that's it for the book recommendations. Lastly are my movie recommendations. Constantine is about John Constantine, who is a supernatural exorcist and demonologist working to make sure his soul goes to heaven upon his death. He ends up getting mixed up with a policewoman who was investigating her sister's death and trying to prove it wasn't a suicide. This was an interesting take on heaven and hell, as it took an almost more realistic approach, I would say. Both are here on Earth, abiding by the laws, but, this is really like what happens when one tries to tip the balance in their favor. So it kind of makes this good mix of that good versus evil trope. And I really thought Keanu Reeves did fantastic as John Constantine. The Nun is about a priest with a haunted past and a novice on the threshold of her final vows are sent by the Vatican to investigate the death of a young nun in Romania and confront a malevolent force in the form of a demonic nun. This is part of the Conjuring movie universe, and if you've seen the second Conjuring movie, this is the same nun. It's just more like a prequel to that Conjuring movie. I absolutely love this. And I probably love this because I loved the second Conjuring movie because of this nun. You can't go wrong with a demonic nun. The setting was at this church, and the religious background and the scenes were just extra jumpy. So I really enjoyed this. And I've tried to watch this in the daytime, and it just doesn't do it justice because a lot of the movie is dark. So, if you're gonna watch it, like, wait till night when it's, like, good and, the perfect time. This movie is always on my list to watch. I've rewatched this, more times than I'm willing to admit. The Ninth Gate is about a rare book dealer hired to seek out 3 other editions of a text. In conducting his research, he ends up getting drawn into a conspiracy with supernatural overtones. So after seeing Johnny Depp in so many, fantasy type movies, it was kind of weird to see him playing, a very normal person. But I always thought this movie was ahead of its time, and I'm sad it doesn't get more love. I love the rare book dealer angle, and, so as a book lover, I love to see that in movies. And I think his uncovering of the different texts is almost as creepy as what he experiences in his research. I would say of all the movies in this video, this one is probably the lightest of them all. It's able to convey that scary devil undertone without a lot of jump scares and gore. last recommendation I have is the Lazarus Effect. A group of medical researchers discover a way to bring patients back to life. But they are starting to realize that what they are bringing back is not the same person. This movie gets a lot of shit, but I loved this movie. This whole movie is set in this research lab, which is just fantastic because you get this added, like, isolation feel, which just makes everything that's going on seem so much worse than it is, you know? The real horror is that you can't stop it, but you can't leave either. So, you know, you get that kind of like, I almost said constipation, but that's not it. That very, like, enclosed, claustrophobic, that's what the word I was looking for. Which just makes everything seem, you know, like I was saying, that much worse. So it's fantastic. I also liked the science-y talk about, you know, the ethics of bringing people back. And there was several discussions of, you know, where the soul goes when it leaves this earth. Pretty trippy. That's all I have for this video. I had a blast reading Devil, Demon, and Hell and horror this month. Drop a comment below and let me know what your favorite Devil, Demon, and Hell books and or movies are. I'm very excited for May. I am going to be tackling witch and occult, which is another one of my go-to subgenres in horror. So stay tuned to check that one out. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in my next one. Bye.